The smell of burning paper hung in the Chicago air that winter. Whispered prayers turned to ash, rising toward heaven with desperate pleas. What happened in that abandoned church basement would remain sealed in classified documents for decades. It began on December 12, 1938, when the smoke started speaking back. Attention. The case you are about to hear was concealed for decades. Before we begin, write in the comments where you are listening to us from, and what time it is this very moment, because this story began at exactly the same time. The winter of 1938 hit Chicago with unusual cruelty. Temperatures dropped well below freezing by early November, and the wind, coming off Lake Michigan, cut through clothing like cold steel. It was during this bitter season that people first noticed the thin wisps of smoke rising from the abandoned St. Augustine Church on Dearborn Street. The building had stood empty since 1935, when the parish merged with another congregation across town. The stone structure with its weathered spires had been slated for demolition, but economic hardships delayed those plans indefinitely. For 3 years, it remained a hollow shell, until someone noticed a flickering light behind its stained glass windows. According to police records written on the 15th of December, 1938, Officer Thomas Wilkins was the first to investigate. His report describes finding the church doors unlocked, though still chained from the outside. This detail would later confound investigators. How did they enter without breaking any locks? The basement access was hidden behind the altar, a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Officer Wilkins reported the overwhelming smell of burned paper and candle wax. The air felt unusually warm for a building with no functioning heating system. What he found in that basement would be documented but quickly sealed by order of Police Commissioner Henry Marshall. The room had been transformed, wooden pews arranged in a perfect circle. At the center stood a metal barrel, its sides glowing with heat. Inside, hundreds of slips of paper burned slowly, the smoke rising in spirals toward a crude hole cut in the ceiling. But it was the walls that disturbed Officer Wilkins most. Every inch of surface was covered with handwritten prayers, names, dates, and requests meticulously recorded in different handwritings. Some fresh, others faded with time. This was not random vandalism. This was organized, methodical. 3 days later, on the 18th of December 1938, a woman named Eleanor Prescott came forward. Her account would form the foundation of what we know about the group that came to be called the Supplicants. Eleanor spoke of 23 members, though she would only name 7. Middle-aged men and women, respectable citizens of Chicago, doctors, teachers, a judge, and several business owners. Not the type one might expect to form a cult. But desperation knows no social boundaries. According to Eleanor, it began with a prayer group that met in the home of Dr. James Harrington in July of 1938. These were people united by unanswered prayers, a child with an incurable disease, a business facing bankruptcy, a marriage crumbling beyond repair. They had tried churches. They had tried faith. Nothing changed. Then Dr. Harrington suggested something different, something older. What if prayers need to be transformed to reach heaven? He reportedly asked. What if they need to become smoke? The idea took hold. Every Sunday, they would write their deepest wishes on paper and burn them together while praying. At first, meeting in Dr. Harrington's study. Later, as their numbers grew, they sought a larger space. The abandoned church seemed perfect, symbolic. For months they gathered in secret, writing, burning, praying, watching smoke rise toward the ceiling and disappear through their makeshift chimney. Nothing happened. Until November 30th, 1938, it was Martha Kellerman who first claimed to see shapes in the smoke. Words forming in the grey wisps rising from the barrel. At first, the others dismissed her. Suggestion, imagination, the power of desperate hope. But then others began to see it too. According to Eleanor's testimony recorded by Detective Frank Murphy, The smoke began to form patterns that could not be explained by random air currents, distinct shapes, letters, words. "We were answered," Eleanor whispered during her interview. "God spoke to us through the smoke." The first message was simple: continue. So they did. With renewed vigor, they wrote more prayers, burned more paper. The basement grew hot from constant fires, the walls blackened with soot, and the messages in the smoke became more specific. Sarah will heal. The money will come. He will return. And strangely, these things began to happen. Sarah Livingston's daughter, diagnosed with polio, showed sudden improvement. William Porter received an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative. Margaret Wilson's estranged husband returned, seeking reconciliation. The word spread quietly among trusted friends. The group grew to 37 members by mid-December. But something changed in Dr. Harrington. According to Eleanor, he became obsessed with the messages, spent hours staring at the smoke, writing down every perceived word or shape. His interpretations became increasingly elaborate. The messages, he claimed, were not just answers to prayers, but instructions for a greater ritual. On December 10th, 1938, Dr. Harrington announced that he had received the ultimate message. God demanded a greater sacrifice than paper, something more personal. Here, Eleanor's testimony becomes fragmented. She describes members becoming uncomfortable. Some left, others stayed, drawn by the previous successes, by desperate hope for their own miracles. What happened on the night of December 12th, 1938 remains unclear. Eleanor refused to speak of it directly. The police report contains only vague references to ritual activity and mass hysteria. What we know comes from what Officer Wilkins discovered on December 15th. The basement was empty of people when he arrived, the barrel still warm. But now, surrounding it were 23 pairs of shoes, perfectly arranged in a circle. Men's Oxfords, women's heels, each containing a personal item, a wedding ring, a pocket watch, a pair of eyeglasses, a child's photograph, and written on the wall in ash, one phrase: "We have ascended." No bodies were ever found, no remains. The 23 members of the inner circle of the supplicants simply vanished. The investigation lasted 6 weeks before Commissioner Marshall ordered it closed. The official conclusion: mass suicide, bodies disposed of elsewhere by the final member. But certain details never made the official report, like the fact that the church doors were chained from the outside when Officer Wilkins arrived, or that the basement had no other exit, or the strange testimony of Howard Jenkins, the night watchman at the building across the street. He claimed to have seen smoke pouring from the church at midnight, smoke that rose against the wind, forming a perfect column that stretched toward the stars. And there were shapes in it, he told Detective Murphy, human shapes rising. His testimony was dismissed. The influence of alcohol, they said, the power of suggestion. The church was demolished in February 1939, the basement filled with concrete, a department store built on the site. For decades, the story of the supplicants remained buried in sealed records, until 1972, when a series of unusual events brought it back to light. It began with dreams. 23 people across Chicago, unconnected to each other, reported identical nightmares. They saw themselves in a circle around a fire, writing prayers that burned but were never answered. Night after night, the same dream. And then they began to find the shoes, left on doorsteps, placed beside beds while they slept. Men's Oxfords, women's heels, styles from the 1930s, each containing a slip of paper with a name. The names of the supplicants. Police Detective Richard Chambers was assigned to investigate. His inquiries led him to the archived files from 1938, to Eleanor Prescott's testimony, to Officer Wilkins, now retired and living in Florida. "We made a mistake," the elderly Wilkins told Chambers by telephone on April 17, 1972. "We should have looked up." The investigation took an unexpected turn when Chambers discovered that all 23 people experiencing the dreams were direct descendants of the supplicants, children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, people who, in many cases, had never known their missing relatives. On May 20, 1972, these 23 descendants received identical letters delivered by hand. The sender unknown. The content was a single sentence: "The smoke speaks again." That night, all 23 reported waking to the smell of burning paper in their homes. Despite finding no fire, no source, the smell persisted for hours. Detective Chambers, increasingly troubled by the case, began his own experiment. He tracked down the exact location of the St. Augustine Church basement, now beneath the housewares department of Miller's department store. On June 12, 1972, after closing hours, with permission from the reluctant store owner, Chambers broke through the floor tiles and the concrete beneath. What he found was documented in his personal journal, later confiscated by the Chicago Police Department. The basement still existed. The concrete had been poured around, not into it, creating a sealed chamber. The walls still bore the handwritten prayers. The barrel still stood in the center. The circle of shoes remained undisturbed, as if time had never passed. But something new had appeared on the wall. Words written in what the laboratory would later confirm was ash mixed with human tissue. "We have not ascended. We have descended." Within 24 hours of this discovery, all 23 descendants reported the same experience. At exactly midnight, they woke to find themselves standing in their living rooms, holding pieces of paper covered in writing they did not recognize, writing that matched the handwriting on the basement walls. According to separate testimonies, they all felt compelled to burn these papers. As they did, they reported seeing faces in the smoke, faces of people they had never met but somehow recognized. Detective Chambers, increasingly obsessed, collected these accounts, compiled them, tried to make sense of the pattern. On July 7, 1972, he requested permission to conduct a controlled recreation of the supplicants' ritual in the original basement. Permission was denied by Police Commissioner Robert Taylor. Chambers proceeded anyway. With 7 of the descendants, he entered the sealed basement beneath Miller's department store on July 10, 1972. They formed a circle around the barrel. Each wrote a prayer on paper. At midnight, they burned them together. What happened next is known only through audio recordings Chambers made during the ritual. Recordings that would be found 3 days later when store security investigated a strange smell coming from beneath the housewares department. The recording begins with the sound of papers burning, soft prayers, then gasps. The smoke. It's forming words. "I can see them. What does it say?" Chambers' voice clear on the recording. It says, "We are trapped between worlds. Help us ascend." The next 3 minutes contain the sounds of discussion, confusion, fear. Then a new voice enters the recording, distorted, multiple voices speaking in unison. "Burn more than paper." The recording captures the increasing panic. Chambers attempting to maintain order, the others wanting to leave. The temperature in the room drops suddenly. The recording captures their shocked exclamations as their breath becomes visible in the suddenly frigid air. The barrel fire, despite the cold, grows more intense. The smoke thickens, and then the most disturbing moment on the recording. Complete silence for 30 seconds. Not the silence of a stopped recording, but the unnatural silence of 8 people who have simply stopped breathing, stopped moving. When sound returns, it's a cacophony of overlapping voices, none belonging to Chambers or the descendants. 30, perhaps 40 different voices, male and female, old and young, all speaking different words simultaneously. The voices continue for 47 seconds before cutting off abruptly. The final sound on the recording is a single voice, calm and clear. "We are coming back through the smoke." When security broke into the basement on July 13th, 1972, they found it empty. No detective chambers, no descendants, only the barrel, still warm, surrounded by 8 pairs of empty shoes. And on the wall, a new message written in ash: "The circle is complete." The investigation lasted 3 months. No trace of Chambers or the 7 descendants was ever found. Their homes contained no evidence of planned disappearance. Bank accounts remained untouched, possessions left behind, as if they had simply vanished. The basement was filled with concrete. Properly, this time. The department store was later demolished, replaced by an office building that stands to this day. The case was officially closed on December 12, 1972, exactly 34 years after the supplicant's original ritual. For decades, it remained buried in classified files, the recordings locked in evidence storage, the story reduced to urban legend. Until 1998, when smoke detectors in apartments across Chicago began triggering simultaneously, all in buildings where descendants of the supplicants or the 1972 group had once lived. Despite no visible smoke, no fire, the alarms continued for exactly 23 minutes before stopping. Fire department inspections found nothing unusual except for one consistent detail: the faint smell of burning paper. 3 months later, a construction crew renovating the office building on the old St. Augustine Church site made a discovery during foundation work: a sealed metal box encased in concrete. Inside was a journal, Detective Chambers' missing private case notes. The final entry, dated July 10, 1972, contains a single paragraph. "The smoke is not the message, the smoke is the door. They did not die in 1938. They found another way to exist, between worlds, not as bodies, but as something else, not ascending to heaven, not descending to hell, suspended in between, and now they want to return." The journal was confiscated by federal authorities, its existence denied. The construction workers sworn to secrecy, but one page was copied before the journal disappeared. A page containing a warning: every 34 years, the door opens again. December 12, 2006. They will try once more. Look for the smoke. On December 11, 2006, Chicago experienced an unusual weather phenomenon. A dense fog rolled in from Lake Michigan, covering the city by nightfall. Visibility dropped to near zero, and scattered throughout the fog, witnesses reported seeing brief, localized columns of smoke, rising straight upward, defying the wind. 31 columns, according to compiled reports, each lasting exactly 23 minutes before dissipating. That night, 31 people across Chicago reported being woken by the smell of burning paper. Each found a slip of paper beside their bed, covered in writing not their own. The message was identical for each: "The smoke thins. We need more prayer." All 31 were confirmed to be descendants of either the original supplicants or the 1972 group. By morning, the fog had cleared. The papers had vanished, leaving the recipients questioning their own memories. No official investigation was opened, no reports filed, just confused people with a strange shared experience they could not explain, until they began finding the shoes, left in their homes, appearing in locked rooms, men's Oxfords, women's heels, styles from the 1930s. The last documented incident occurred on April 17, 2007. A janitor at the office building built on the St. Augustine Church site reported hearing voices from behind a wall in the basement, voices chanting in unison. When the wall was opened for inspection, workers found a small, previously unknown chamber, empty except for a metal barrel and a circle of shoes. And written on the wall in fresh ash, December 12th, 2040, the final door. The chamber was sealed immediately. The janitor transferred to another building. The incident buried in bureaucracy and denial. The last document was dated the year of 2007. No new records have been found. Some say none of this happened. Others prefer not to comment.